At 17 hours Greenwich Mean Time, here is the news on the Voice of America.
This is Talk to America. Now, here are your hosts, Meredith Buell and Barbara Klein.
Earthling meets alien. This is the dramatic scenario that's driven countless stories, novels, and movies. But contact between the human race and another intelligent life form is no longer a matter for the silver screen and the newsstand tabloids alone. It deserves serious scientific consideration, according to today's guest.
Harvard University's Dr. John Mack, a respected psychiatrist and a winner of the Pulitzer Prize, lends credence to individual reports of alien contact, reports that are not taken seriously among many in the scientific community. Dr. Mack argues that accounts of human and extraterrestrial contact are too numerous, too vivid to be ignored.
Human contact with aliens is our topic. We're eager to hear your thoughts on this provocative subject, so get ready to place your call. Dr. John Mack's controversial argument that science needs to study rather than scoff at the reports of alien contact was made in his 1994 book, Abduction, Human Encounters with Aliens. Dr. Mack joins us today from radio station WBUR in Boston, Massachusetts. We're very glad to have you with us, Dr. Mack.
Good to be here, Barbara.
Dr. Mack, you've worked literally with many, many people who claim to have had contact with alien life forms. As your experience with them has progressed, how much do you believe of their accounts that they've been carried aboard spaceships and been the subject of various experiments?
I think the first thing that needs to be said on this subject is that I haven't approached this from the standpoint of belief. I've approached it as a clinician. That is, I listen to accounts, I talk with people, I try to make my assessment of whether they're being sincere, whether they're suffering from some kind of psychiatric illness, whether there is something to gain from what they have to say, whether they've picked up information from the media. And in case after case, I have found that we're dealing here with people who, by and large, are of sound mind, who have no psychiatric condition that can account for what they are telling me about, and who are reporting with doubt that is appropriate on their part very similar accounts all over the United States, and now we're discovering from all over the world. And what I have stumbled into here is what I call an authentic mystery. In other words, I don't know the source of these experiences. I don't know the sort of reality status of these aliens. What I do know is that these individuals are having experiences which mystify them, trouble them, sometimes are powerfully growth-promoting for them, but are to them very real, and for which I can't find any what might be called conventional explanation.
You mentioned in your preface that you have a growing conviction about the authenticity of these reports, and that's why I asked, over time, has that conviction gotten greater in your mind?
Yes, I like the way you put the question, because you're talking about authenticity of reports. In other words, you're not prejudicing the question by saying, is this literally real in our physical world, just like a table or a glass of water, but that it is authentic in the sense that these people are having these experiences. We don't know how to account for them, that these experiences are occurring in the physical world as we know it, that it enters into the physical world for these individuals. In a number of instances, people are actually observed to be missing during the time that they reported an abduction experience. So it does enter into our physical reality, even though it may not originate in our physical reality.
And it is an experience that you do call an abduction. I mean, that you refer to throughout the book as a UFO abduction.
I'm a bit apologetic about the use of the word abduction. I inherited the word. We recently, just to give you a sense of the tricks that language plays and what we have to think about there, I recently interviewed a number of children in Zimbabwe who had, on a Friday morning during a school break, this was outside the capital of Harare, had witnessed a number of UFOs landing and several strange beings coming out of the craft who sounded very much like some of the aliens that we've interviewed. So I asked one of the girls there, 11-year-old, by the name of Emma, I said, what do you call them? And she said, well, everybody calls them aliens. And I said, well, what do you want to call them? And she said, well, I just call them strange beings. In other words, that if people are left to invent their own language, they might come up with something fresher than abduction, but that's the word I inherited when I started doing this work, and I'm kind of stuck with it, which it implies every person is literally taken against their will and physically removed into a spacecraft, and that may or may not be the case. In other words, a number of people are, in fact, apparently physically removed, but others seem to be having the experience as it were in place, and perhaps it's not their physical body that's being taken, but something more subtle is occurring.
Well, let's get to some specific examples. Your book has, I think, 13 cases in it discussing people who come to you claiming to have had these experiences, and then you document them and discuss them in each chapter. So tell us about, I'm just pulling one out of the hat here, someone you call Sheila N. Mm-hmm. Could you recount her story for us?
Yes, Sheila is a psychiatric social worker, a very solid citizen who began to have experiences of what she called electrical dreams. In other words, she, like many experiencers, liked to call these nighttime experiences dreams. But when you press the person, as I did with Sheila, and say, well, tell me about the dream. So you were in your bed at night, and then tell me what happened. And then they'll say, well, an intense light came in the room. This is true in Sheila's case. And then I saw this shadow of this being. They may see the being with big black eyes, several of them around. And I will say to the person at that point, as I did with Sheila, well, you didn't say you were asleep. Or in other cases, the person will say, well, I woke up, and there were these creatures around me staring, and there was this intense blue light. And I'll say, well, you weren't asleep. And at that point in the interview, the lip may begin to quiver, tears may roll down the person's cheeks, because they realized they had wanted to treat this as a dream or as a fantasy or even as a form of mental illness, so that I, as a psychiatrist, could somehow make it go away or it wouldn't be real. And it's that kind of intense feeling, the not wanting it to be real, the rejection of it until they just have overwhelming evidence to themselves that what they've experienced is real, which is what happened with Sheila. Until that happens, they don't want it to be true any more than we do. And for that reason, that's one of the very strong kind of psychological pieces of evidence that made me take this very seriously, because this operates like a person who's had a real experience who doesn't want to believe it really happened.
We're talking to Dr. John Mack of Harvard University about his book, Abduction, Human Encounters with Aliens. And you're tuned to Talk to America, and we'll be right back. It's 15 minutes after the hour on The Voice of America.
We're talking about alien abduction on Talk to America today. Our guest is Dr. John Mack, a Harvard University psychiatrist who has released a book entitled Abduction, Human Encounters with Aliens. This topic is one that receives a lot of attention, certainly at the very least in the tabloid press. Talk to America's Patrice Michael talked to some Washingtonians about their views.
Do you think it's possible for other life forms to visit this planet?
No. Me personally, I haven't seen any different forms of life, and I really don't believe in spaceships or aliens.
Well, I think it's possible. I just don't think it's very likely anytime in the near future, and I haven't seen any evidence that it's actually occurred.
I think it is, because I think that they're as advanced as we are, and that they're trying for space exploration like we are, too.
Do you think it's possible for other life forms to visit this planet?
A long time ago, I used to believe that it was very possible that there's other life forms out there, but now for some reason it's become so sensationalized and the stories get more and more outrageous. I'm less inclined to believe something like that.
What do you think about people who claim to have been abducted by other life forms?
Well, I'm pretty much a skeptic. I'd have to hear the whole story, and I pretty much go into it with an attitude that it's probably not true, and I'd have to hear something that would change my mind.
I think they're making up stories just to get in the news.
I haven't heard any of those claims that seem persuasive to me.
That's VOA's Patrice Michael talking to people here in Washington. Again, our guest today on Talk to America is Dr. John Mack of Harvard University, and we're talking about his book, Abduction, Human Encounters with Aliens. We'd like you to join our conversation, and you can, at no charge to you, by calling us collect here in the United States at 202 202-619-3111. Dial your international operator, ask for the United States, and for the charges to be reversed, and give us a call at 202-619-3111. Dr. Mack, a question that I would have thought was obvious before I read your book, but now I know is not that obvious, and that is, what are the indicators of abduction experiences? How do people, we were talking about Sheila before the break, know that they have had one?
Usually they don't know. They have had some kind of experiences, often in childhood, of strange presence around their bed, which or being floated through walls or intense light, or they may actually see these beings with the large black eyes that come into their rooms, and they hadn't necessarily known what it was, but they may talk to the parent. The parent will say, this is a dream, and they'll say, no, it's not a dream. Or they may have some intense kind of experiences of seeing actually UFOs, bright lights up close, of being paralyzed in their beds at night, or strange lesions appearing on their bodies that they can't explain, or actual intense dreams of being inside an enclosure, procedures done to their bodies. Missing time is another common symptom that they can't account for. They're driving along and suddenly they find they're on another road and they can't account for where they've been, and they will recall some beings coming around their car. And something that they will often have a sense that maybe it's UFO related or something like that, and go to a person in the community that they think knows about this. They usually stay away from mental health professionals because the phenomenon is so poorly understood, and often they get interrogated in ways that are more harmful than helpful. So they find someone that is at least open to the mystery of the thing, and then they begin to recall their experiences. Sometimes they will recall a great amount of detail consciously, but often it's useful to have an additional kind of relaxation opportunity for the person, a modified form of hypnosis to help bring back some of the fuller memories. But I think it's important to stress that a great deal of the recall of these experiences occurs in conscious memory, has nothing to do with hypnosis.
I'd like to refer back momentarily to the comments we heard from people on the street, from Washingtonians.
Yes, so would I.
Yeah, okay. I'm sure what they said was nothing particularly new to you. Is that right?
Yeah, in other words, what this tells us is that it's so hard for people to take this seriously, to believe it, unless they personally have had an experience, or it's happened to a relative, or they hear something that is so vivid, so powerful that it overcomes the natural denial or resistance that we have. Because
or evidence. They're also saying, show me. Give me proof.
But one of the difficulties with this is that there is evidence. In other words, when you work with people, as I have, intensely psychologically, and you get these very powerful, consistent, authentic stories together with the physical evidence of lesions on their bodies, witnesses that they're missing, the tight association between UFOs observed independently in the community and the person's actual experience, you have evidence. You don't have proof. And I think we're so geared by traditional science to want proof of something that if we don't have proof, we want to reject it out of hand. So in this case, we don't have proof, but we have evidence. And yet, because this phenomenon is so beyond what is accepted in official reality, people will push it away at arm's length, as some of those people in the street in Washington did. For example, one person said these people are claiming this. People don't claim it. They don't want it to be true. They actually will deny it as much as those people that were interviewed deny it. In other words, they want it's what I call the anything but syndrome. People don't want this to be so because it suggests that there's other intelligences in the universe that have more power than we do, that we're not in control, we're not in charge. And this whole culture has developed a kind of fanaticism around control and being in charge and feeling we're at the top of the intellectual hierarchy in the cosmos. And this phenomenon strikes at the arrogance of that worldview and is therefore, I think, very disturbing to us. And I mean, somebody said, well, they're just making up stories. Well, I haven't found that to be the case. I haven't found people wanting these stories to be true and certainly not making them up.
Dr. John Mack of Harvard University is our guest today on Talk to America. His book is called Abduction, Human Encounters with Aliens. And we'd like you to join our conversation, and as always you can by calling us collect at 202-619-3111. Our first caller today is from New Zealand. Robert, go ahead. You're on Talk to America.
Yes, greetings, Professor, on this supposedly provocative but surely fascinating subject. Yes, I hope belief actually can be kind of eased out of the subject. But a couple of things I'd like to ask you about. One is that there was mention about how some scientists don't take it seriously. What would you think would convince a lot of skeptics and scientists, if there wasn't any agreed upon opinion as to what would, to give it more attention? And do you think what do you think would be the best way to get more resources and funds allocated to the subject? And secondly, I'd heard it has been claimed that there are certain things reported by people who give reports of having been abducted by aliens that have not become well known outside the community of those people investigating it, partly at least to try and ascertain whether people who deliberately try and claim to have been abducted by aliens when they know fully that they haven't. In other words, they're trying to nobble the research, the investigation, so they can be weeded out.
Well, there's several questions there. I think that the increasing numbers of scientists are taking this seriously. For example, internationally known physicist at MIT, David Pritchard, optical physicist, he and I chaired a conference at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, in 1992. We had 90 researchers there. A number of them were distinguished scientists, and Pritchard takes it seriously. Rudolf Schild, who's a leading astrophysicist at Harvard, takes it very seriously. There are quite a number of scientists who are open to this, but you're right. There's a kind of official attitude that, well, this can't be, and I don't know what would convince them. I mean, the historian of science, Thomas Kuhn, said you just have to wait for the older generation to die off before a new worldview can assert itself, and I don't think we have that much time in this situation. So I think gradually, though, increasing numbers of respectable academicians and scientists are beginning to come into this. There's a group that I met with recently in Colorado called the International Association for New Science, which consists of many scientists who have been in mainstream situations but are now studying this and related phenomena. So I think it's happening. I think that if people like myself, like Michael Swords, Bud Hopkins, I could name a lot of people, continue to tell what they're finding, report their results. John Carpenter is a psychiatric social worker who's reporting on abductions from Missouri, the state of Missouri. Increasingly, people are coming forth, telling their stories, and it would have been unthinkable, for example, for a program like this to treat this subject seriously several years ago. So I think it's happening. I think that the phenomenon is under study. I think the way we study it perhaps is the more fascinating question. In other words, how do we study something which requires that you become really very attuned to the person you're talking to? They won't tell you about their experiences unless they develop trust. So already the investigator is part of the participatory matter. Now, that's true. That's been recognized to be true in science more and more anyway, but we have this idea that science is somehow objective. We stand apart, look at a phenomenon, get proof, but that's really not the way science necessarily works. Science, as I understand it, establishes patterns that are consistent and that something we can learn from those patterns. In this case, there is a consistent pattern of these accounts, and then we have to see, as you suggest, how authentic the person is being. Now, your second question has to do with people that are purposely putting out what is called disinformation. In other words, that they're confusing the waters by making up stories that are not true, they don't mean it, that are outlandish, and then when that's shown to be outlandish, then that will distract from the investigation of the truth. And there are examples like that, but I think they're very few. I mean, I think that more and more people are coming forward. We're learning that people are having these experiences all over the world, and it's getting reported in the press in Europe, in South Africa, in Brazil. I'm just talking about some of the places I've been. So I think it's happening. Whether it could happen faster, and I do think there should be more money allocated, and I don't think that'll happen till the official press, the official scientific community, the governments begin to acknowledge the reality of this. So I think up till that time, it's going to depend on private foundations and private donors to fund this work. And some of that is occurring.
Robert, thanks for calling us today from New Zealand. Let's go to India now for a call from O'Neill. Go ahead, you're on Talk to America.
Okay, hello Barbara.
Hi.
Hello Meredith, and hello Dr. John.
Hi.
Hello.
This is Anil from New Delhi.
Yes, hi.
You see, some time back, I read a book titled Without a Trace by Charles Burles, and he's supposed to be quite an authority on, say, Bermuda Triangles and UFOs. And so in his book, he has forwarded a theory by Carl Jung. According to Carl Jung, UFOs, while real, are also partially a psychic phenomena. This theory suggests that UFOs, rather than being craft from outer space, are either from this planet or from a contiguous dimension and in some way connected with the psychic potentialities of the viewers. Okay, to be more specific, he says that UFOs depend for the form and visibility on the collective consciousness of those who see them, which may vary with individuals. So I would like to have your comments on this.
Yes, I think Jung's ideas on this subject are quite profound, and he was one of the people that started serious interest in this subject of UFOs in the scientific community. I think what's crucial in what you're saying is the matter of it being both real, that is, manifesting in the physical world, and psychological at the same time. In other words, what Jung has done is to break down the rigidity of the category between the physical world and the unseen or the psychological world or the world of spirit. In other words, that it can be both. And I think often people that are critical in this field that don't understand what Jung and you are implying here think it's either physically real or it doesn't exist at all, or it has to be either physically real or from the unseen realm, but it can't be both. And this seems to be, the way I look at it, this is a phenomenon that may originate in some other dimension of reality, some parallel universe, and manifests in this universe and does show up in physical form. And we don't have any place in our mainstream scientific community for that kind of a crossover phenomenon, something that seems like it ought to stay in the spirit world, but shows up and enters into our physical reality. That shakes up the Western worldview.
And it certainly shakes up astronomers like Dr. Carl Sagan, who we had on the show just a short while ago, and we asked him this question, and basically he comes up with the same answer I assume many astronomers do, and that is they do want to see this physical proof. They want to see a photograph. They would love to talk to the people who may or may not be visiting us from other planets. But Dr. Mack, we are going to have to take a brief break here on Talk to America today. It's a fascinating discussion. We have a lot of callers. We ask those who are on the line to please hold. We'll be back to you in just a moment or two. You're listening to Talk to America on VOA, and tomorrow we'll look at the science of polling. It's one of the most important tools in politics today.
And we'll continue today's discussion in just a moment. It's 1:30 on the Voice of America. Mysterious encounters in the dead of night, strange and frightening experiments, visions of a dangerous future for humanity. These are some common features of reports coming from people who claim they've been plucked from their beds, taken aboard an alien spacecraft, and introduced to another intelligent life form.
Meetings between humans and extraterrestrial beings are the subject of Abduction, Human Encounters with Aliens, written by psychiatrist John Mack. He is a professor of psychiatry at the Cambridge Hospital of Harvard Medical School. Dr. Mack is also the founder of the Program for Extraordinary Experience Research at the Medical School Center for Psychology and Social Change. And, of course, he's our guest today on Talk to America. If you'd like to talk to him, you can by calling us collect at 202-619-3111. Let's go back to the phone. Srikant in Madras, India. Go ahead. You're on Talk to America, Srikant.
Thank you, Meredith.
You're welcome.
Hello, doctor.
Hello.
Yeah. My question is, you come across so many people who have experienced this encounter with alien species. Now, out of this, what kind of picture do you form of the alien species? Are they from just one planet or several planets? And could you also share a couple of other stories from your book? I'll hang up and listen to your answer.
Yes. There are, by far the most frequently reported type of being is a creature about 3.5 feet tall with large black eyes, pear-shaped head, rather spindly arms and body, with who is seen both in the bedroom or around a car or in the ship. Then there's a larger figure of that same type, which they call the leader or the doctor, and they're the ones that are most commonly reported that follow these intrusive procedures in the spacecraft. But there also are reported reptilian type of beings, light or luminous beings that are somewhat taller, more benign, more loving, if you will. Then some human figures are sometimes seen working alongside these other beings. A Nordic type has been described with blonde hair. There are a number of other types. The question of what they're about, what this means, why they're visiting us at this time is extremely complex and interesting. It seems to have to do with something about what has happened on our planet. And this is not something I was ever brought up to believe in my American education, but evidently we are creating some kind of a ripple at a cosmic level. In other words, our process of destruction of the earth, of treating the earth simply as a marketplace to be consumed for this one species, is causing some kind of disharmony, which is bringing these beings to the earth. As one major religious leader in India actually said, we are destroying not only their physical but their spiritual home, so these beings are having to materialize in order to reach us, in order to stop our destructive process. I don't know if that's true. It's very difficult to know what this is about. I know that that's the experience of many people, that they are shown visions of the destruction of life on this earth, a future without water, without drinkable water, without food that can be eaten. Basically, an extension of what is in fact happening on the planet. So there's a kind of truthfulness, and what we're told is that the earth is sacred, that it is not for us to consume, and that in some awkward way, some higher intelligence seems to be trying to reach us to keep us, as one experiencer put it, they're like butterflies trying to stop the caterpillars from denuding, eating up the bushes. So in some way, there's some kind of intervention, correction at a cosmic level going on here, which is awkward, may not succeed, but apparently what we're doing to the earth is some kind of cosmic crime, which I never would have believed in a million years the way I was brought up. But here it is. That's what we're being told.
Well, it's interesting, Dr. Mack. We did a program some weeks ago on apparitions of the Virgin Mary, and there is some overlap, quite frankly, between messages that people who say that they have seen the Virgin Mary, messages that they get, and these messages that you're talking about, apocalyptic messages, things about peace, taking care of the earth, and so forth. Does that enter into your study of this at all? Do you find that an interesting parallel?
Yeah, I mean, I think the difference there is that when you're dealing with the Virgin Mary or with angels, the scientific community doesn't get too excited because they can chalk it up to kind of mass belief or mass hysteria or mass delusion, because it doesn't do that one sacred crime to the Western worldview, which is to show up in the physical world. In other words, where you have UFOs that can be photographed, you have lesions on people's bodies after their experiences, you have blue light that comes into the room. In other words, there's a hard physical edge to this phenomenon, which is not simply an exalted experience with a mythic goddess type of figure, but something hard-edged, concrete, disturbing, with physical manifestations. So it knocks on our door scientifically in a way that some of those experiences don't. But that the communication or message would be similar doesn't surprise me.
Dr. John Mack of Harvard University is our guest today on Talk to America. His book is called Abduction, Human Encounters with Aliens. And you can join our conversation, as always, by calling us at 202-619-3111. We have quite a few callers who would like to talk to Dr. Mack, so if you could keep your questions and comments as brief as possible, we would appreciate it, and I would give the maximum number of people the opportunity to participate in today's program.
Can I give an address that people could write to if they're interested in communicating with me?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Write to me at, it's Dr. John Mack at the Cambridge Hospital, CAMBRIDGE Hospital, 1493 Cambridge Street, Cambridge, Massachusetts, 02139. And I'd love to hear from people around the world that have had experiences or have some ideas about this phenomenon.
All right, and we'll give you the opportunity to tell us that again before the end of today's program. Let's go to our next caller, Mr. Lynch in Thailand. Go ahead. You're on Talk to America.
Hello, can you hear me?
Loud and clear. Go ahead. You're on the air.
Yeah, actually, I'm in Taiwan, Taipei. But I have a question of Dr. Mack.
Sure.
This may be a fairly mundane question, but I can't get over this. Suppose these beings have been visiting this planet? Perhaps like something out of the movie, what was it? Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Something like that. Now, assuming that they came from thousands or even millions of light years away, they would have to have traveled at greater than the speed of light to get here. And if we hold Einstein's theories to be correct, their mass would have become infinite to do that. How could they do that?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. I think one of the things one has to do to approach this phenomenon is to realize that we're dealing with a phenomenon here that may not obey the physical laws of the universe as we have studied them. In other words, that there is some way in which these creatures have overcome space and time, and many of the experiencers who are in contact with alien beings will say that space and time seem to collapse during their experiences. They seem to be able to not necessarily have to follow the literal physical laws of traveling 186,000 miles a second, but to travel as if by thought, or be able to move through space and time in ways that modern physics has thought about but has no way really of replicating or understanding. And I think this is an example of what this phenomenon has called for from me and from others, which is to suspend the way we generally think logically. I don't mean put out all reason, but at least to suspend the way we think conventionally about the physical world or about the world around us, so that something new, some new way of understanding might come in. Because I don't think this phenomenon is simply one that obeys the laws of the physical world as physicists have studied it conventionally. I mean, it defies those rules. It operates by some principles that we don't understand, and by the same token, the way we learn about it is through not just the use of instruments and observation in the kind of separate, I'm over here studying something objectively over there, but we use our full consciousness to enter into an understanding of the phenomena. Now, science hasn't necessarily accepted consciousness as an instrument of knowing, but in this case, it seems to be the way we've learned about people's experiences and about the phenomenon. So if someone is totally wedded to the literalist physical world, that kind of comment of mine isn't going to seem satisfactory at all.
Mr. Lynch, thanks for your call today from Taiwan.
Let's go to the Philippines. Juan, you're on Talk to America.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning. Good afternoon.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir. Sir, my question is, what is the alien purpose of contacting people?
Is there any information on why they're here? You write about, a lot of these people talk about sort of studies being done on their bodies. Is there any indication of why?
I'll respond to that, but you have to realize that in answering that, I'm being speculative. This is way beyond science when I try to say why, because we don't have an alien psychology. We haven't been able to interview alien beings on our terms. So all we can go by is the pattern that I see in case after case. The pattern looks like this. Some kind of hybrid program is going on to create a race of beings which may not be literally in our physical world, but which is, we are told, to populate the world after it is no longer habitable by densely embodied species such as ours. Secondly, the experiences seem to change the nervous system through intrusions into the mind, the brain of people, so that people become more open, more interested in connection, more concerned for the earth. Third, there seems to be a pattern of confrontation about what we are doing to the earth, the destructiveness that we are creating at a cosmic level. And finally, there's a kind of opening of our consciousness to a reconnecting with what is called source, or the spiritual, creative, loving origin of things in the universe from which we have strayed so far. And there is this range of experiences. Now, I don't say this is what the aliens are doing, but whatever the higher intelligence at work here that is bringing these two or more species together, this seems to be these seem to be some of the projects that are occurring here.
Very briefly, what has led you to speculate that they are creating this hybrid being? What has happened?
The great majority of the people that have been studied in depth who've had these experiences report, the men report sperm being taken, the women report eggs being taken. On subsequent abductions, the fetuses have been taken. They report. They are taken to see hybrid or sort of mixed human-alien creatures in the craft. They're asked to nurture them, to play with them. This is a major part of the details of the abduction experience. And what is striking about this is that someone who is not familiar with this, who's had the experiences, is told about another person who's had the same experience. They react with shock because they didn't believe it themselves. And when this highly detailed accounts occur from person after person, and until very recently, these details were not in the media, but were being experienced freshly by these individuals. This becomes, again, persuasive that something is going on. But in what dimension of reality, we don't know. In the Western countries, physical reality is the only reality we really credit. But in many Eastern traditions, religious traditions, philosophical traditions around the world, there are many realities. So it's not so hard to grasp that a phenomenon might originate in one reality. For example, Tibetan Buddhism has mandalas which show many, many different realities, and this could emerge from another reality and enter into our reality. So, but we don't have a place for that kind of thinking in official Western science.
You're listening to Talk to America on VOA, and we'll continue our conversation with Dr. John Mack of Harvard University about his book, Abduction, Human Encounters with Aliens, in just a moment. It's 15 minutes before the hour on the Voice of America.
We certainly hope to hear from you tomorrow, but in the meantime, call us collect today to talk with psychiatrist John Mack about his work with clients who claim to have been abducted by alien life forms. Our number again is 202-619-3111. We've got a lot of calls, so if you get a busy signal, try us again. We'll do our best to fit you in. Dr. Mack, I wanted to pose to you a question we got by fax from Lawrence Traeger in Munich, Germany. He asks if there are historical accounts that respond to the experiences that you have studied.
This is a very interesting subject. There are, going back to biblical times, chariots in the sky, air balloons in the 19th century, fairies abducting people in Ireland. We have a number of accounts, some of which are largely mythic, that seem to resemble this phenomenon. The difficulty is these are largely oral traditions. You don't have the kind of careful scientific methodologies that we have now. You didn't have the kinds of clinical science that we're developing in this century that can discriminate between when something's an authentic experience someone's having and when it's a product of myth and imagination. So there are experiences throughout history that look like this, but the abduction phenomenon, as we've studied it, particularly since the Betty and Barney Hill case in the early 1960s, appears to have a certain hard edge that we are beginning to close in on and look at in ways that are not, if not yielding their secrets, at least it is opening itself to the observations of clinical psychology and a clinical approach.
Betty and Barney Hill?
Yeah, Betty and Barney Hill were an interracial couple in New Hampshire who experienced a rather classic abduction situation when they were on vacation coming back from Canada to the U.S., and a strange light came, the beings came out of a ship, they were paralyzed, they were taken, they were frightened, and they were hypnotized, which by a well-known doctor in Boston, and the stories came out which were very similar to the stories that we're getting from thousands of people in the United States and around the world at this time. But that was the first well-documented case, and it's very recent. In other words, it was written up in a book in the mid-1960s.
Lawrence, thanks for your facts from Germany. We have a caller calling now from Germany, Christoph. Go ahead, you're on Talk to America.
Yes, hello everyone.
Hi, Christoph.
Let me also take this opportunity real quickly to say hello to those on the VOA staff with whom I've corresponded by email before.
Thank you. It's always good to hear from you.
Good. Okay, my question to Dr. Mack is the following. Has anybody who has been claiming to have been visited by aliens ever documented such an event coincidentally, either on tape or on video?
I want to address the word claim, because the people that have these experiences are not claiming this. I mean, they often don't want it to be true. They're troubled about it. They will report something with doubt and with questioning. I think it's important to realize that these are not people that are coming forth wanting something to be true. There are a number of videos and audio tapes that have been taken from in the ships or not in the ships, but which the people will report when they think that there's a presence in their homes. I've listened to a number of those tapes. I'm not convinced that it really proves the existence of these beings. What I've come to about this is that we're dealing with something that is by its very nature subtle, which doesn't mean the experiences people have are subtle. They can be very troubling and disturbing and vivid and real and powerful, but subtle in the sense that it doesn't yield its secrets to what we like to have in Western science, like gross material proof. In other words, this is not something that is going to reveal itself at a purely physical level. We're going to have to, I think, grow and open our own consciousness to grasp that there's something very powerful going on here, which is, as I said, subtle, which enters from another dimension perhaps, and which shows up in our physical world, but is elusive. It leaves traces, but it doesn't knock us over the head in a way that would satisfy the demands for material proof. But that's, I think, that demand is best for phenomena that are purely in the physical world, but something that comes from other dimensions, that may not be the best method of study.
Dr. John Mack, a psychiatrist and author of Abduction, Human Encounters with Aliens, is our guest today. Our number, 202-619-3111. Let's go to Amy in Malaysia. Hello, Amy. You're on Talk to America.
Hello. Good afternoon, Dr. Mack. I have a question. Okay. I'm not a skeptic. I do believe that these things are happening. At the same time, I'm wondering, because I'm a Christian, I'm wondering, could this be also satanic agencies and evil angels masquerading as aliens from outer space? Because my great-grandmother had seen such forms before she was about to die, and she prayed to God about it, and they left, and she was able to live for 15 years after she accepted Christ. So I was wondering, could that be also an answer to that, instead of being aliens from outer space?
Well, I guess the way I look at it is that I try to keep things as simple as I can. I have enough complications in just trying to document what these beings look like, how they communicate, which is telepathically, what happens to the people that have these experiences. But to introduce that this is satanic and bring in the whole mythology and the whole religious ideas that go with that is beyond what I have. In other words, I don't have any evidence for that. The experience is kind of mixed. It's really not an evil experience in a simple sense. I mean, people are troubled and traumatized by it, but they often will grow emotionally and psychologically and spiritually with the experiences. So it's a kind of rich, complex experience which has a validity in its own right, and I try to not complicate it by bringing in belief structures from Christian or other religions. I try to treat it as best I can as a clinical observer who's documenting patterns which are robust and show up in case after case in my country and around the world.
Let's go back to South Asia. Ravi in Bangalore. Go ahead. You're on Talk to America.
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to Meredith and Barbara, and welcome to Dr. John Mack on Talk to America.
Hi, Ravi.
Good afternoon.
Nice to have you, Doctor. Doctor, I must say this is a great topic to be on our show, and my head is buzzing with hundreds of questions, but I just want to ask you one question as follows. Based on case studies of yours, as documented by you in your book, are there any indications that these so-called aliens would be making mass contact or any contact with us in the near future, as opposed to their present subtle and unobtrusive sort of research?
It's a beautiful question, and many times experiencers will say, they're going to show up in mass, they're going to really reveal themselves in 1995, 96, 97, whatever. I'm not, I'm a skeptic about that. I mean, it is en masse. I mean, we have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. Whether they're going to show up in so grossly in such mass form that even the most hardened skeptic would say, "Oh my God, look, there are all those aliens there." You know, I don't know whether there's some interaction between our being ready for that and our consciousness and this phenomenon occurring in that way. I don't know. It could happen, but so far it remains subtle, elusive, requiring us to stretch our consciousness. Very recently, we documented that in September 16th, 1994, as I said earlier, in Harare, 60 children saw several spacecraft and alien beings, 2 or more, outside the spacecraft, and every one of the kids described exactly the same experience. These were children from 9 to 12 years of age, and it was very powerful, very robust. It showed up, but again, it's the reports of these children. They're consistent. The teachers all believe them. The headmaster believed them. But the fact, the kids didn't come back with a piece of the spacecraft or a real good photograph of any of the beings. So again, it's still, even though the evidence is there, it's the evidence of reports of consciousness, of experience, which we tend not to credit so much in the West. Other cultures do credit experience, but we in the West have kind of got ourselves into this box where we have to have proof of everything and control of everything, and I don't think it's going to, as I said before, it's going to yield itself to that mentality.
Well, Dr. Mack, you are a traditionally trained psychiatrist through Harvard University. How did you get into this, and why do you think these people felt comfortable enough to talk to you? You've just been studying this, as I understand it, from 1990.
That's right. Well, I think psychiatrists already begin, in a sense, with crediting what a person feels, what a person recalls. We often can't prove when somebody tells us about what they experienced as children or what went on in their families. We can't necessarily prove it. So we already have a tradition of trying to make discriminations of what is the motive for this person of telling this account, this narrative, this story, and to learn when is a person being authentic, when is something really happened, So, in a way, I was following the tradition of psychiatry, of psychodynamic psychiatry, psychoanalysis, by being as careful as I could to interview people in depth, to learn about them, and to decide how does this phenomenon behave. In other words, it behaves by virtue of the consistency of the accounts, the intensity of the feelings which the people have in relation to their experiences, the appropriateness of those feelings. It behaves as we've come to know in psychiatry when somebody's really had an experience, when what they're talking about really occurred. Now, what this is and what the source of it is, where it originated, that's where the mystery is. But as psychiatrists, we're trained to make those kind of discriminations. When's the person telling the truth? When are they talking about something that really happened? And when are they telling you a story or a dream or something that serves them in some way? And I came to the conclusion, and nothing has shaken me from this, that these individuals are talking authentically about something that, from their perspective, really happened. Now we can get into the more philosophically subtle questions of in what reality did it occur, where did it originate, but that it's real in some way we need to pay attention to. I mean, that nothing has shaken me from that. And with all the thousands of cases that have been reported in this country and overseas, there's never been a case that has turned out to be something other than what the person reported. Behind this has been another explanation.
In the 10 seconds or so we have left, do you want to repeat your address?
Yes, I would. I'd love to hear from people who've had these experiences from
Very
around
briefly.
the world,
or
have something to say. My address is it's Dr. John Mack, the Cambridge Hospital, 1493, Cambridge Street, Cambridge, Mass. 02139.
All right, psychiatrist John Mack, thank you so much for joining us.
Tomorrow on Talk to America,
Thank you, Barbara.
It was a pleasure. Tomorrow on Talk to America, the pollster to President Clinton. Until then, I'm Meredith Buell.
And I'm Barbara Klein. We hope to talk with you next time on Talk to America.
You're listening to the Voice of America, your worldwide source for news and information. We now say goodnight to listeners in South Asia until 1 hour GMT. VOA Worldwide English continues to the Middle East in the 6 and 9 megahertz band shortwave. VOA English to Africa continues in the 11, 13, and 15 megahertz band shortwave and on 909 kilohertz medium wave. This is the Voice of America.